Yeah, hi, I'm Sean Nakamura. Yeah, I'm one of John's coworkers. As he mentioned, I'm one of the full stack software engineers at Webmocha. We're a consultancy agency for software. And I guess, yeah, I've been working on an enterprise level web application, which sort of manages cloud resources. And it relies heavily on React and Redux. And sort of one of the things that we've been doing is our React application is built on HLCs. And we use this library called Recompose, which helps us build our HLCs. So recently, Recompose sort of said that, hey, now that hooks are out, we're not going to be actively maintaining this library anymore. So that sort of gave us an excuse, or sort of like a call to arms to sort of say, all right, let's start exploring what React hooks are, and how can we integrate that with our code base. So so today's workshop, sort of a live demo. I'm hoping to kind of like showcase how to build React components using the old class component style, and a new way, which is building it in functional components using hooks. Okay. All right. Can you all see my screen? Okay, cool. Yeah, so sort of to recap what I talked about earlier, we built our application using HLCs, or also known as higher order components. One of the libraries we use is called Recompose. It's sort of a utility library that helps us build applications with higher order components at a better developer experience. And you'll see a note from the authors. He's no longer maintaining it, and that gave us an excuse to start exploring hooks. There are two main reasons. One was to continue keeping our code base modern and up to date, and also to sort of manage potential technical debt that could arise from having unmaintained libraries or packages, or even deprecated packages. So it's a twofold. Want to kind of explore new things, and to sort of protect us from potential breakages in our code. With this being an enterprise level application, we definitely did not want this application to break at any point in time, especially when someone decides to update a package. So I guess, yeah, we're going to talk about hooks. And so sort of this kind of stems from one of our recent tasks of when we had to migrate our HLCs over to using functional components with hooks. We actually still have not completed it. It's an ongoing process, but I want to kind of convey that sort of migrating class components, React class components, over to functional components using hooks is not a huge undertaking. It's not going to be complex. And I also kind of want to show, hopefully at the end of the workshop, you'll see that hooks are a lot more declarative versus class components. And there's going to be less boilerplate setup that we have to sort of hook up when we write React components the classical way. So throughout the workshop or demo, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on two fundamental parts of a React component. One is managing the state of a component. So we're going to be checking out the state hook. And the other example is we're going to look at managing the lifecycle of a component. So we're going to be checking out the use effect hook. And how we're going to do this is we're going to build a component as a class first, and then we're going to rebuild that exact component as a functional component using hooks. So sort of hopefully that should draw a bridge of the translation between a class over to a functional component. All right, so without further ado, let's kind of get started. I'll kind of show, this is what my current I guess code base or project looks like. It's very simple. We're using Parcel to bundle our application. It's we just have a simple index HTML app container, and along with importing the app.js. And of course, we have our app component, which is the entry file. So we should say hello world. Parcel is pretty cool. It's a no configuration bundler, so, and it also includes sort of auto reloading, so we can have all that fun stuff built in without any of that configuration. So check it out if you guys are interested in. All right, cool. So let's see. we're going to start off with managing state with a component. So let's build a simple counter component. Let's build a components directory, and we're going to call this counter. And so we're going to build a counter component that hopefully will manage. It'll manage its own local state. Let me see if this. Hopefully this is better. We want to add sort of a way to increment that local state, a way to decrement that local state, and also reset that. So this is sort of our component that we're going to build. So let's get started. Obviously, we're going to have to import React as usual. And we're going to declare a class. So let's just call it class counter. Of course, we have to, it's not a React component until we tell it that it is a React component. So we're going to say class counter extends that React component. So this is sort of like the old classical way of building a React component using classes. Being with a class, we do have to instantiate or construct this object. We'll run super so that it can inherit all of the properties of that React component. Cool, but let's just make sure it renders or it just displays something. So let's simply do another hello world, as we always like to do when we write new components. So we'll create a div, and we'll simply say this is our counter component. Component. I definitely spelled that wrong. Okay, there we go. So we'll save that. Let's open up and import that into our app so that we can get it to display on our browser. So we'll do that, import that from components, counter. You should simply be able to just say counter, run that. Do we get a hello world? Oh, something wrong. Oh, that's because we did not export this. So let's export that. Export default counter. That should give us our counter component. Hooray. Awesome. So now we have a counter component. Let's actually remember we want to manage some local state. So does anyone have an idea or remember how we would, I guess, establish state within a class component or a React component using a class? Okay, cool. So it's simply as this dot state, and this is going to be the state object that the counter component will be managing. So this is how we do it as an object. We'll simply, I guess we'll call it count. And to make sure that actually is true, we can sort of like just render it. We can say, let's just say count. Our count is, and then we'll render that this dot state dot count. We'll save that, and then we should get that count is 0. Awesome. So we are sort of rendering a state. This is sort of our initial state. So we could set this to anything we want, like 1,000 or 999. So that's our initial state. You know, the state that this component will have when it renders initially. So let's bring that to 0. So now we have some sort of local state. We're not managing it just yet, but we're going to need to start to kind of build some functions to manage that state. So we could sort of build, let's build our increment function. We're going to need some buttons. So let's build a button. We'll call it add, or we can call it increment to be more explicit. Let's make sure that renders. Cool, we got an increment button. Awesome, click it. Doesn't really do anything, so we still have to hook it up. We can do on click, which receives the on click prop. So we can have a function that actually increments that. Would anyone happen to know how we could modify our state using a property that exists in our class provided to us by React component?
And you said this dot set state?
Yeah, this dot set state. So we're gonna have to build that out. Let's build that in line, you know, sort of our quick hello world. So we can do this dot set state. Set state, definitely it takes in an object, but it takes the entire object of the component. So we're gonna have to actually write this out explicitly. This is getting a little unwieldy. Let's move this over. So this dot set state, and we're going to say count. And I guess we could probably do this dot state dot count plus 1. We'll clean this up later. But hopefully what we're doing is we're creating a brand new object with the count property, and we're going to say we're going to take the original state of the count. We're going to add 1 to that. So let's test that. Does it work? Awesome. We are now incrementing. Cool. But would you agree that we may not want to put our functions in line in our JSX? A little unreadable. So we're definitely going to want to move that out. And what we can do is we can create a class method or a function within the class that will simply handle the clicking of this button. It'll invoke this function, and then hopefully in that function, it'll set our state. So we can do that. Something like, we can call it handle increment. We'll call that a function. And we'll probably just take this whole thing. Let's remove this out and move this in here. Let's clean this up a bit so it's a little more readable. Boom. All right, cool. That should make sense. So we built our function out here, abstracted a little bit, and we can simply run it here. So far, let's check it out. Increment. Looks like it does not like that. This, oh, that's right, because this, yeah. There we go. All right, so let's test it. Does it work? No, it does not. Seems like it's complaining about this is undefined.
Arrow? Could you use the arrow function?
Could use an arrow function. How would we do that?
For const handle increment.
Need to bind it.
Yeah, we have to bind it. We could do const handle increment first is an arrow function. I think would be.
You're in a class, so you don't need the const.
Oh, right.
Right.
Right. So this is the function expression, right? Where we're sort of like implicitly binding the context, right? So this would work too. Awesome. I did hear a bind, which is the original way of doing it. So this is we can think of this as the function expression. This is sort of experimental. I think it only exists in stage 0 of, I forget which ECMA version, but this is still not officially part of JavaScript. So if we were to do this the original way, which let's bring this over, how would we do that? I heard someone say bind.
This dot handle increment equals this dot handle increment by.
Yeah, where would we put that?
Inside a constructor.
Yeah, that's right. Because we definitely want to instantiate on the instantiation of it, right? So this dot, let's see, guide me here. Handle increment is what?
This dot handle increment by.
Oh, I wrote that wrong. Dot bind, and we're going to bind the context. We're going to bind this over to the function. So now the function is attached to our counter component, right? Okay, let's test it. Does it work? Awesome. Yeah. So now we have context of this. So yeah, there's two ways. This is the original way where we are actually explicitly binding the context over to our handle increment function. And of course, the new experimental way, which is going to require some sort of setup, is yeah, we can have an arrow function, a function expression to be able to bind that context. Awesome. So yeah, let's keep it with this way, so we don't have to sort of do all this binding for the rest of our functions. So yeah, let's just build the rest of it, decrement and reset. I think I like to build the UI first. That's just sort of a habit of me. So see, what I look at is what I build my functionality behind. So we can do decrement and we can do a reset button. Oh, oops. Oh, that's because we have empty on clicks. Of course, it's angry. So let's just remove that for now. All right. So we have our increment, decrement. Yeah, obviously these don't work. So let's build our other functions. Handle increment. Let's make this decrement. And then maybe the set state, we'll just say the count is -1. Cool. Let's attach that to our JSX, make sure that works. This dot handle decrement, save that. Add, awesome. Can we minus? Awesome. Cool. Can we reset? Not yet. Let's make that. Let's do handle reset. And we'll simply just say this is 0. Let's add that. Cool. Let's test that. Increment, decrement, reset. Awesome. So we have built our counter app that will manage local state with these 3 handlers or methods, I suppose. Building purely with a class component, right? So this is how we would originally build our React components a few years ago. So now that we know how to build a class component, let's build it as a functional component using hooks, specifically the use state hook. So this guy right here. Awesome. Let's get started. All right, so it's going to be as simple as we're going to declare a function. I guess we could call it counter. We could probably just still call it, yeah, let's call it counter hook. And that's it, just a function. Let's, of course, we want to get that hello world going. I think we can just say return, and we'll call it counter hook component. And then we're going to have to export this in a meaningful way. So I suppose we could just, we'll just export it like counter hook. So we're no longer going to be exporting counter anymore. Let's save that. We shouldn't see this. Yep. The reason why that worked is because of that. We can pretty much name whatever the default export we want out of that. So that's how it simply just hooked up automatically. Awesome. Thank you, JavaScript. Okay, let's move on. All right, so we have this. We'll deal with the JSX after. So I guess I'll just dive into the hook itself. We're going to have to import that use state hook. So if you look at the documentation, I also would highly recommend reading through the docs. React actually does a really great job of explaining, each of the components that the new APIs that they've been building. So it's definitely a great resource. So let's actually import our use state hook from React. So use state, and simply the way we're going to sort of establish our initial local state. What it is that the use state function, I'll write it here. The use state function, what it does is it returns an array of values, or in this case variables. Then that array, the first index is always going to be the value of the state. So we could probably call this count, just like how we did here in this state as the count. And then the second, or the index 1 of the return array is the setter method. So we can name this, we can almost name this anything we want, but in this case, the convention is sort of, we want to say set prefixed in front of our value. So in this case, it's going to be set count. And that is returned from that use state hook or function. And the argument that we're going to pass into the use state is the initial value, what we want count to be, exactly like how we did. Initial value is 0 here. We're going to say the initial value is 0 up here. So to demonstrate that, we can simply do what we did on the below. We'll just say count, and let's remove this, is 0. And I can also edit this as well, put any number I want in there. That's the initial state, exactly like how we did here. So that's how we establish our initial state. Cool. So yeah, let's actually, now that it's starting to kind of look like how we did this in our original class component. I suppose, does anyone want to drive me? Like maybe what the next step we would want to do to replicate our class component that we wrote below?
use set count to update the count?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do it very verbosely, like inline. That's always a good hello world, is to write things inline before you start abstracting them in functions. So let's just say on click, and we're going to say set count to be count plus 1. And then we'll close that up and call this increment. And then close that up button. Hopefully that should work. Will that work? Yeah, awesome. So now we have this built up. How do we abstract this now that we built this inline? We can still declare functions within a function. So we can declare a variable, we call it const. You can name it handle increment. Is a function that will pretty much look virtually like this. We're going to say set state is count plus 1. Hopefully, will that work? Let's see.
Wouldn't it be set count? Isn't that the whole point of the?
Oh, sorry, set count.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had the other word in my head. So it is set count. Let's test that. Will it work? Yeah, awesome. It works. Okay, cool. We can even clean this up and make this return, because since that's we could simply have the handle increment function return the set count function. Because that's the only thing it's doing. Of course, if we wanted to add other side effects in that function, we can expand this with the brackets. But in this case, we can simply just do that. Of course, we can also do the same thing for here. We're just sort of cleaning this up just a little bit more. Cool. So yeah, let's just build the rest of that. We can just copy this over, build the rest of our function. We'll definitely want to remove this. It's going to complain. Make sure that renders, save that. Okay, we got our buttons, cool. We could probably copy these and build our handlers. So handle decrement, handle reset. The handle decrement should subtract from the count 1, and the handle reset should, of course, make sure it goes to 0. Awesome. Let's add these handler functions back. On click, handle increment, and on click for the reset, we should handle that reset. Oops. Okay, would that work? Incrementing, cool. Decrementing, cool. Reset, awesome. So now we just built the exact component using a functional component with hooks. Compared to when we originally made it with a class. Any comments on the differences or similarities, or the difference between when we built it as a class versus building it as a functional component? Any comments on that or questions? Any wows or ahas?
I have a question. So
way
on the previous model, you used this, but on hooks, this wasn't used when you set on click. Why isn't this used on the hooks version?
So what the hooks does, it's I'm not exactly sure on the underlying implementation, but what a hook does, it sort of provides that I guess context already to the function, versus this, because we have to sort of expand on the component. What a functional component does, it's just sort of React just takes that function and then sort of just knows how to parse it. So the reason why we don't need this is what hooks was trying to solve, is to become more declarative, in that we don't have to worry about understanding, I guess, the context of a state or context of the object. Did that make any sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
On
I had a
line
question.
12, are you destructuring? Is that a destructuring thing you're doing there?
Yes, so destructuring. So use state returns an array. that's the value of what the hook does.
Okay.
Simply just a function that just returns something like this, like
Wow.
value and then a function. Yeah. So that's what that use state is probably. This is probably what it looks like on a very high level. But yeah, it returns a value array, and then yes, we are destructuring the indexes of that array to something, a meaningful variable name.
All right. Thank you.
I was wondering, how do you handle multiple functions in one event? Say on the onClick, it'll handle 2 functions.
How would we do that?
Mm-hmm.
You're wondering how we would run 2 things. Yeah. So I mean, so what we're doing here is we're implicitly just returning set count, meaning just run set count, and that's the end of our handle increment function. We can quickly show a quick example of how we would, I guess, run 2 things in a handler. We could just say set count. Let's just pretend this console log is another function that you would run in this handler. Just as an example. So we can say something like hello world. And so whenever we click this increment, it should run the hello world, and it also should set the count. So go boom, boom, boom. And so we're also console logging that as well. You can see the 10 and 10. So that's how we would normally run it. Remember, there's just functions. You can run anything you want in that function. What we did earlier was simply just being more fancy, because the intention of the handle decrement function is to subtract the count. But yeah, but you can totally run other functions within this handler.
Would you be able to separate out those functions though? Say for instance, one would be like an API call and the other one would be, setting the count, and they'd have to be 2 separate functions, not necessarily run at the same time. But when I hit the onClick, it'll handle both of those.
So you're saying when I click on this button or function, it's gonna, we want to do 2 things. It's gonna make an API call and then set a state, something like this.
Yeah, but you wouldn't necessarily want both of them in the same function.
I think it depends on like the intention of the component. I mean, one would probably do some sort of fetch, and then maybe on the then promise they would set the count. I guess that could be one. I suppose you could, maybe that fetch call would set a state somewhere else and then set the count. I probably wouldn't set state at that point. You definitely would want to keep that separate. Each function should be intentional to this point. So maybe on that button, you would just make sure it does an API call, and it would return some value, and then you'll have to handle it elsewhere.
How about like a generic handle button click, and then depending on which button you click, it would call a different function?
Say that one more time.
So if you just had like a generic handle button click function, and then depending on which button you clicked, it would call a different function. So you would have like a increment and decrement function within the handler.
Okay. I guess that's sort of like abstracting or getting more fancy. So sort of saying like, if we had like some sort of like really big like handle click function that maybe takes in the type, and then based on that we can switch something like on that type, like if it's increment, then do the set count, something like that.
Sure. Or maybe like on an attribute of the button, like give it a name or a value or something like that, and then target or something like,
Yeah, I'm sure you can totally do that.
Okay.
I probably won't explore that in this demo, but I mean, I'm sure you can probably add like a prop that, when you like, let's just say like a data type, and you can call this increment, for example. And so maybe the handle increment, let's clean this up. You could probably, the handle increment, you can also have that event, because we're implicitly invoking that. And maybe on that event, you could probably get that like, whatever attribute, some sort, which probably could, produce increment on that specific event. You probably could do something like that. But yeah, that's how I would approach it like that.
Okay, thanks.
Are
Cool.
you talking about event target ID kind of like change the value? E-target ID equals e-target value, something like that.
That's what I was
Yeah.
getting at. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I mean, remember these are just implicit. So this is an implicit. So I can actually, let's quickly go over that. I can console log that event because remember this implicitly being invoked. So we have the event object in here. This is the same way as writing it like this, where I actually produce the function like how we did earlier, and I grab the event out of that function and I make sure it's invoked with that event. The same thing as saying that. So, but by implicitly passing it in like this, what we're doing is we're just skipping that arrow function. So yes, you will have access to the event argument. Actually, a good practice would be you can also add this event argument in there just so that for reference, assuming that you can add that event. You can pass the event object down to your handler function if you want. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
Cool.
All
right.
So I just have one more question real quick.
Mm-hmm.
So with set state, it takes in an optional callback function, and you can use that to get the current value of the state after you change it. Is that functionality also available with the set count or with hooks, or is that not even necessary?
I don't think it would be necessary, but we could check. Let's check this out. Let's look at the API reference. We'll quickly check this out. I think it only just takes in one argument, which is just the initial. There was a reason why, with regards to that second argument, the set state. So let's see. Use state does automatically. I believe because the use state only focuses on that one value, you're not paying attention to, I guess, the rest of the scope. I think if I haven't built using this set state in a long time, so I'm assuming that second argument returns the whole object as a whole. So that's because set state mutates the entire state object versus use state focuses on just that one value, the one value that you give it to. So let's just say, for example, if you had this name here, Bob, and if I had simply, when we ever invoke any of these other functions, it's gonna actually reset the entire state object to just be count, and then Bob no longer, the name property no longer exists. So we sort of had to do sort of like that. We had to spread out the original state.count, which is very annoying because we have to do that for all of our handler functions. So at least with the use hook, because it just focuses specifically on one property or value, if we wanted to, let's just have the name and set name, we would have to sort of declare that again, and this would be Bob. So the reason why, I guess, does that help? Yeah, I guess give you context on why we don't have that second argument in the use state versus.
I think so. I don't think you actually need, I don't think the name.bob, I don't think that would be deleted. I think you can just do count this.state count +1, and Bob will the name Bob stays in there. The whole thing with the callback function is that if you underneath that line that you're on right there, if you did console log this.state.count, it would give you it wouldn't give you the updated. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it wouldn't give you the updated value. Right. So I think that's what the whole point of having the callback function, because if you pass in the callback function and console log it, then it'll give you the updated value. So I'm just wondering if this is available with hooks.
Hey, Sean, I think he's referring to how like the previous count was what he was asking, and I see it right there.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's like this.
Look at the hooks version's up above that. Above it, the code box above it. You can you can get the pull in the previous count. The prev count is what count was, and then adding to it.
Yeah, so like the count value is going to be I guess, previous or current.
And then the second and third buttons in there, how is pref counts, pulling that in as an argument, and creating a function inside of it.
Oh yeah, there we go. So I guess the count would be the previous count or the current count of that, I guess, action.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Cool. All right. That's it. We're gonna move on to the next next hook. You guys good? Everyone good with that? Cool. All right. Let's check out that. Let's check out that use effect hook. So use effect is going to be you can sort of see the use effect hook as sort of your lifecycle management. So we're all familiar with the fundamental methods that is usually provided to us from the React component, such as component did mount, component did update, and all that fun stuff. So we're going to explore that. So let's get there. We're going to create a new component. Let's call it tick. So we're going to help us sort of essentially, yeah, we'll write this out. I'm going to hide this. I'm going to say we're going to have a tick component. This component, I suppose, as a way to kind of like show like what's going on this tick component. When I guess we want to console log when state is updated or mounted, or I should say when something is mounted, or the component when the component is mounted. Good boy. Let's just console log state, and we also want to console log that state when the component is updated. So we're gonna keep it simple for now. Before getting anything deeper, and we're gonna talk about a few other I guess attributes of this use effect hook. But first and foremost, we need to build the class components to sort of draw our relationships between that and the functional component. So let's do that. We're gonna import React from React. Clean that up. And we're going to declare a class called tick. Of course, it's going to extend our React component so that we can get all of the fun methods and values into this class. So of course, we're going to construct it, instantiate that, make sure we get all of our properties. And of course, as always, we want to do a sanity check. Make sure that we wrote this correct and exported and imported this correct. So let's just keep it simple. We'll say this is the tick component. Don't forget to export that. All right, we're going to import the tick component from tick. I'm actually going to clean this up just so that we can only just see the our tick component. All right. So I just make sure that, okay, awesome, we have our tick component. Okay, so does anyone remember how we would, I guess, so to speak, run a function when this component is mounted?
Component did mount.
And did mount.
Yep, component did mount. And when we say, we're gonna stick with console logs to keep it simple. We're gonna say when component mounted, we're gonna say.
Finishing up now. Emmy, are you okay?
Say that one more time.
Oops.
Okay, let's just do this. Okay, so now we have. Hello, I have mounted. Awesome. So we know that. When this component mounts, it's going to make its console log. Awesome. Next step, we're going to do component did update, meaning we want to make sure that whenever something in this component, it could be anything, it could be state, it could be props, when one of those things change in this component, we want to make sure we console log that that value has changed. So we're gonna kind of like just sudo make that work. Let's just create a quick simple button. Since we demonstrated this from the previous example, we're gonna do handle tick. Oops. Actually, yeah, let's do that. I'm gonna make sure let's actually build it on state. We wanna make a console log every time the state of this component changes. So we could say tick is 0. That's our initial state. And on this handle tick, we actually want to set the state to be tick. This dot state dot tick +1. Hopefully that should work. On click is this dot handle tick. And oops. Okay, so let's actually, I forgot one more thing. Let's actually render our tick value. Okay, cool. So we have our tick. Okay, awesome. It's totally incrementing or ticking in this case. All right, so let's just say how, based on this, now that we have this functionality, how would we wanna console log something? And maybe we'll just say a word. When a component updates. So how would we do that with a class component?
Component did update?
Yeah, we can do that. Component did update. We'll say console log, I have updated. So we can do that. Then we expect a console log to happen. I have updated every time I hit this button. Okay, and it's totally updating it based on that. Cool. All right. So that's pretty much the super rudimentary example I wanted to show with the classes. There's definitely other parts we can explore, but to keep things simple, we're gonna stop here. Just to make sure that now that we were understanding that on this mount, this is how we originally wrote React components with classes. We were given this component did mount method that was passed to us by extending the React component, as well as the did update. So these functions or methods would invoke based on that specific event that would happen within the component. So with this now, let's build it with a function component using hooks. So in this case, we're going to check out hooks. We're going to import the use effect hook from our React library. Let's totally do that. Use effect. We're also going to look like we're going to need to manage some state. So let's also import our use state in here. Okay, so let's build that function out. Let's call it a tick hook. So we know that it's with the hook. Okay, so as usual, let's just make sure we have our hello world going. And we'll call it, this is the tick hook component. And then we're gonna make sure we just simply export the tick hook. So now we have the tick hook component. Awesome. let's just build out the rest of our component now that we use the bottom part as sort of our reference of how we would build our functional components. So we can do const, let's say tick. We can set the tick. That's use state. Okay, so now we have our state. Let's actually make sure that works. So let's bring that button over. Let's bring that tick value over. Make sure that works. So tick is tick. Make a constant handle tick. And we can just say set tick is tick +1. Let's move out this because we don't need that anymore. Let's make sure that works. Okay, our tick functionality is working. So now we can get into the good stuff, which is how would we translate our component did whatever methods, how would we translate that over to using that use effect hook that React has provided us. Okay, cool. So simply to just dive right into it, we're going to sort of have that use effect functionality. We're going to declare it right inside of our function. So the way I like to think about it is use effect will always run whatever the contents it has in here on events, on a specific event, where that event could be a mount, that event could be an update, it could be other things. So I could, like, we'll just dive in. I'll just say, hello, I have mounted. And we notice how this has console log. Awesome. Looks like, see, it's running all the time. Actually, I should just say hello, for example. So we console logged on mount. Awesome. Notice how it's also console logging on every update. That's because we're missing something. It's called a dependency array. And that is the second argument of the use effect. And this is where you actually start to configure the difference between did mount and did update. So to ensure that the code that it exists, or actually I should say the function that we have passed into the use effect, we want to make sure it only runs on mount. And it's as simple as saying the dependency array, we're going to pass in an empty array. And I'll explain a little more about how we're going to configure this. So what I mean by use effect is going to invoke this function, which has the contents of console log on the mount. Ta-da, we have it on the mount. When I attempt to click, notice how there are no more console logs following that. Why? Because what this dependency array is telling our use effect function to do is only invoke this function if any of these values inside of this array changes. So I guess if I were to sort of explain that, an empty array, if you simply put an empty array, you could sort of draw to conclusion that it's just going to purely be a component did mount. When we add, some sort of variable in there, a component, it's sort of like it will invoke on that respective variable name. So I'll show you how that's going to work. So now let's just say we want to have this hello every time it's updated. Right now it isn't, because we're telling our use effect function, I'm not telling you to look for anything. I'm not telling you to pay attention to anything in order to invoke this function. So based on, I guess, what I've said, what could we do in this dependency array or this array so that we would have this hello every time we hit the tick button? Any ideas?
What if you passed in tick?
Yeah, let's try that. Let's pass in tick. So now, before we even get started, before we even test this, what we're telling our use effect hook is saying if the value of tick ever changes, run this hello. So obviously on mount is going to do hello. And so now hopefully when we mutate the value of tick, we should get some sequential console logs after that. So will it work? Awesome. So now it's specifically invoking on that value. So if I remove this and I try to tick, no, we don't get any of that. It's not invoking that function anymore. But if we add it, meaning we're telling our use effect hook, okay, if this value changes, definitely run the function. I don't mean this. I actually mean like this arrow function all the way here. Run the entire function on that tick method. So yeah, that's the super high level explanation sort of like demonstration of the use effect hook and how it would relate with our component did mount and component did update with motion components and hooks. Cool. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, I kind of missed it.
I got a
So
question.
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess I'm having a little trouble understanding how that, like the use effect maps onto lifecycle methods. So I understand when you change a variable, it initiates use effect. But if you wanted to really make that inclusive for the whole component, would you have to use every variable in the component? You know what I mean?
No, you don't have to use it.
So,
yeah, I mean, you can be very specific about which you're just saying. Here, let me rewind a bit.
like if I wanted to do component did update, that would be if anything in the component updates.
You want it anything.
So,
if you wanted to run this function on any change of the component, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
And not just tick. Yeah. So
Yes.
simply just remove the dependency array. So now you're saying I don't care. I'm taking anything that changes in this component. So on the mount, anything that changes. So by not having the dependency array, you're just telling useEffect, just invoke this on any change that happens in my component, and I don't care. By adding the dependency array, now you're actually explicitly saying when to invoke this function on based on certain circumstances, right? So yeah, to answer your question, is just remove the dependency array, and it'll just run on anything, on any change. So ideally, for good practice, you always want to have a dependency array or an empty one. You don't want to necessarily leave this empty. It could produce some side effects that you may not know of. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, just remove the dependency array if you want it to run on anything that changes.
Is there any way to create something that emulates component will on mount?
Yeah, totally. Does anyone have any other questions before we sort of explore the component will on mount?
Just a quick one. Let's say you wanted it to use effect on just the update, but not the mount. Is there an easy way to do that?
Actually, I actually don't know. On just the update, I suppose you could. Yeah. Well, let's explore that towards the end of the workshop if we have time. But yeah,
sure.
I'll keep that in mind. Okay. Any other questions or comments before we dive into will on mount? Okay. All right. So let's just explore the docs to kind of make sure that we're all on the same page. I believe we're gonna talk about cleanup. Where is this? Come on, show me. Okay. So to clean up, it's usually the term is called cleanup. To sort of invoke our will unmount sort of behavior in the useEffect hook is what the useEffect hook will return. So meaning on that return function, it's going to run this when the component unmounts, so to speak. So to kind of demonstrate that, let's just say, let's just do this, for example. We're going to return a function that just console logs tick hook is unmounting. Okay, so we have no way of sort of demonstrating that. So it looks like we have to kind of go up to our parent. We have to let our parent component control the behavior of this component mounting or unmounting. So we can go to our app here. We're just gonna do some quick shotgun surgery. Let's actually I guess we could import useState. Let's see, it's gonna be very rudimentary. Let's return app is now a full-blown function. Move that over. Let's just say const. Let's just display it. I'm gonna set that display use state. Originally, we want to say yes, totally display this. And I guess here we'll just say display and tick. Any questions on the syntax though? What I'm doing is I'm just saying, what I'm saying is that if display is true, then render the tick function, render the tick component. If it's false, then of course, don't display it. So here I'm gonna do a button. I'll just call it on click, and you don't have to be fancy about this. I'll just simply go set display to be the opposite of what display is. So display tick. Ooh, missing something there. Button. So hopefully, when I click this button, it's going to set it to false. Therefore, we're going to be unmounting the tick component. Hopefully, we're going to test out in a second. So let's see. Will that work? Awesome. It disappeared. We're no longer rendering the tick component, and we could see that our tick hook component has recognized it. It has unmounted. It's no longer being rendered on the DOM. Therefore, it's going to invoke the function that was returned to it. So that's pretty much the quick sort of example of how you would write a component will unmount using use effects. Cool. Any other questions or comments?
This has been really helpful. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that.
I have a quick generic question. I'm just starting out on hooks and context, so it's really helpful. This display is really helpful for me. But if you're using hooks, do you guys eliminate Redux?
No. So hooks. Well, I guess it depends on the architecture of your application, of course. Hooks does not necessarily eliminate the need for Redux. In fact, Redux does. I think the certain version of Redux, or I should say React Redux, they do provide hooks that you can use to communicate with your Redux store. There is another. If you really truly wanted to eliminate Redux from your application, then I suppose you would use like the use context hook that React does provide. So that it depends on right here, use context. So this is essentially what Redux is built on. So I wouldn't say if you're migrating an existing Redux application to use hooks, you probably may not want to actually replace Redux, because that sounds like that's a very integral part of your application. So I guess it depends on the situations and the desires of the intention of what you want to do.
Like you probably would use Redux for global state, and use hooks for if there's like a local state, or if you have to use like lifecycle hooks, right?
Are you saying like?
I'm just starting out, so I'm going for interviews, and I keep getting asked about hooks. So I started to learn, and I'm just trying to I'm wondering why we would be using hooks, because with Redux, it's we are storing all the global state in Redux. So what kind of utility does hooks serve? Is just like abstract the code, or what is the benefit of hooks over Redux is my point. Because from what I'm seeing, all hooks does facilitate using state and lifecycle methods in functional components. But if you're storing the state in Redux, what kind of benefit do hooks bring to the application? I'm just trying to find out so I can learn myself. That's it.
Mm-hmm. The hooks and Redux are, I suppose they're kind of like different parts, like apples and oranges. I wouldn't say you would use one or the other. So what hooks does, it simply it provides a more declarative API in building React components. So whether that would be managing state locally in a single component or creating context throughout various areas of the application. Versus Redux is you can build Redux with hooks, like re-implement Redux with hooks. I guess so let me ask again. So the question was, why would you use hooks over Redux? Is that the question specifically?
Yeah, because with Redux you can use map state and map state to props, and you can always pass the state to the component. That's the whole point of Redux, because it's scalable and you can reach out to Redux global state. If the state is global and not local, then like team or user auth, I believe those are global states, and you can store them in Redux. And then you can always fetch the state with map state to props. So I'm just wondering, like, because I'm going to interviews and people are talking about hooks, not in context, because context kind of can remove the utility of Redux. They're not talking about context, but they're just talking about hooks. So I'm thinking, what's the point? Like, if unless you want to do like abstract, because it does remove the code gets a little bit more abstract. You don't have to use this from what I've seen from your demo. So is that the point? Is that why everybody's using hooks? I'm just trying to find out, like, what's the difference between map state to props to using hooks is my question.
Okay. I guess what I would like to think of hooks is sort of like the API that you would use to interface with a React component. I think let me know if I'm going to go off track of what you are looking for. The original idea when we used to use Redux with our React applications, we did have map state to props. And that was all built using an HOC. So in order to connect our component to actually use the benefits of Redux, we had to sort of, use this connect method, right? And then I think we pass in our component, right? Let's just call it the component. Right. And then here we had like all of that fun stuff, like map state to props function, and then we had our map actions or whatever, right? So this was the old HOC. So what hooks does is sort of like removing the hooks. The reason why I guess the React team built hooks was so that we could migrate away from using HOCs, which is sort of this whole like wrapping components within other components. I suppose maybe why you would use hooks over Redux. It's still a very broad question. I suppose like you would use Redux. Why would you use it? Maybe you want to remove some abstractions. Maybe you want to move away from higher order components. Maybe you don't want to do this whole connect and then wrapping your components in these HLCs. And you would actually just use React Redux's provided hooks to be able to get access to the store instead. So I guess you would probably rewrite it. It would be more of a rewrite, more of a developer experience decision is how I would propose that answer. I mean, does anyone else have any, I guess, ideas how they would answer that question?
Yeah, I can jump in real quick. I actually use hooks and Redux together all the time, and they serve very distinct purposes. I feel like hooks in a component, I use the state hook in a component when I want to manage state just for that component for a very specific thing. Good example is a form, where you're maintaining the state of the form in that one component, but really that form component plays in the bigger pool with the larger app. And when you submit the form, then it goes into the Redux store, those values. So hooks are great to make small, quick, one-off components that have their own state. Redux for application-wide storage of bigger state objects. And that's the balance that I use. It's made my code a lot smaller and easier to read by using hooks in that way, if that helps.
Yeah, very much. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you stay with the tenet that Redux is a single source of truth, so even if you can, because I mean, in theory, like even prior to hooks, you know, if you wanted to, you could manipulate the state at a lot of different points, but you just didn't want to. And the whole thing was like, well, you know, in pure functions, they're supposed to be stateless and all this sort of stuff. But if you want to write your whole code in pure functions and still want to maintain the single source of truth, this is a great way of letting you kind of dip your toes in. You know, kind of have your cake and eat it too, because, you know, the whole like language agnostic aspect of Redux and all the rest of that means that you get to basically have it both ways. Like you don't have to worry about changes in your code suddenly rendering your Redux store not useful. And alternately, if you want to move away from Redux, you still have access to your state without a tremendous amount of work.
Oh, that makes sense. Thank you.
I was wondering also on top of the Redux question, is there any reason to use Redux instead of just using use context?
The question was, is there any reason to use Redux over use context?
Exactly.
Yes. The way I like to see it is Redux is sort of like that global state, like maybe think of it like the state of the entire application as a whole. There's always that single source of truth that we all talked about here, that any component anywhere can simply just reach up to the sky and grab that state value. I've used context in areas where maybe I wanted a certain part of the application to sort of have a global-ish state, but not all the way at the top kind of global state. Think of like maybe like a sidebar, like for example, I wanted this area just to have its own global state in which each of these little components can reference to in that global state here, but maybe not in the entire application as a whole. That would be sort of my explanation on that. Anybody else have their other ways of explaining that?
Hi, this is Alkai. I think for me personally, the reason why I would still use Redux over hooks is that it's still like widely supported and maintained. And I mean, the biggest thing for me is the Redux dev tools. It's really easy to like see what actions and see your state and see exactly what's happening a little bit easier than hooks. I'm pretty sure that React dev tools might have been updated recently, but like the main thing is that, you know, it's still being supported. You know, it's proven to work on big applications, and the dev tools are really easy to work with. So those are really that'd be, in my opinion, why I would use Redux.
Yeah, the dev tools are pretty amazing because you can really watch, like, especially if you're dealing with a lot of API calls and stuff like that in your apps, then like you can watch step by step as like, you know, are we in, you know, like, is the call sent? Are we in loading? Are we no longer in loading? We're not in loading, but the object isn't populated. What the hell? Let's go back a step. And that's Redux.
Plus the idea of time travel, right? That's
really lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, like all of those things are why. But like, I mean, you can definitely, I mean, it's really up to you, I think, if you want to use context or Redux. I know I work with Nakaz too, so I know sometimes we'll do, you know, when we first start out building maybe like a proof of concept, we'll use context to start off. And then once the app starts to grow, we'll like, hey, maybe we should start using Redux now because of how big we know the app is going to get, kind of thing. So, but yeah, I think it's like personal preference still.
I find big context hard to manage, especially when you have multiple contexts. It's very confusing. And I've found myself using Redux for actual data management on the front end, and context for more contextual things. And of course hooks for super small component things. They all have their place, and used correctly and together, you can make something amazing. But trying to fit an enormous application into context it'll drive you to drink.
I agree. I found context a little bit of more of boilerplate than Redux versus Redux.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. It sounds like maybe hooks are on the small part, use context is a medium-sized fit, and Redux is like a large enterprise level application. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Yeah, that was a great discussion. Hopefully that provides more information on your questions regarding Redux and all that fun stuff. Cool. Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you everybody. Are there any other questions or comments or things we may want to review or discuss? Okay. I guess I'll hand this back over to John then. John and Justin. But I just want to say thank you for your time. Hopefully this was helpful. My goal was essentially to show you guys that, show everybody that hooks are more declarative, there's less boilerplate, and the transition isn't, you know, isn't a huge undertaking. It's hopefully you'll be, based on this demo, you have seen the one-to-one relationships from translating a React component built with a class over to a functional component with hooks. So yeah, thank you for your time.